Hello, my name is Dr. Jim Doty, and I'm the host of the Into the Magic Shop podcast, where we explore the mysteries of the brain and the secrets of the heart. Hi, this is Dr. Jim Doty, host of the Into the Magic Shop podcast. My guest today is Rick Doblin, who many of you may know as the founder of the Multidisciplinary Association of Psychedelic Science. Some have called him the king of the psychonauts. He has had a long-standing interest in psychedelics and has been at the forefront of not only their therapeutic use, but also in legalizing their use. He attributes his interest in psychedelics to his disappointment with his bar mitzvah, amazingly enough. And we'll hear more about that today. Also, he did the first follow-up on the Good Friday experiment 25 years after that work was done by Timothy Leary. And we'll hear all about that. So this should be a fascinating discussion, and I hope you really enjoy it. Thanks again for listening. So I think, Rick, that you were saying you're talking about the underestimated risk of the Good Friday experiment, specifically in regard to the individual who left the session. The other thing I wanted, maybe you could comment on, because you mentioned Houston Smith, who I had the pleasure of meeting near the end of his life. You hadn't mentioned him before, so how did he also intertwine in this as well?
Well, okay, so the Good Friday experiment was done with 20 divinity students from Andover Newton, and they were divided up into 5 groups of 4. And each of these 4 students had 2 experimenters. And one of them was going to get psilocybin, and one of them was going to get the placebo as well. And Houston Smith, Ram Dass, Gunter Weil, Ralph Metzner, a whole cascade of really, really interesting people, Walter Houston Clark, were the experimenters' assistants, and they were assigned to these groups. So as part of my follow-up to the Good Friday experiment, I interviewed not just the subjects, but also as many of the people that were assisting as well. And so there's actually a later paper that Bob Jesse wrote with Houston Smith about the story about this one person that was tranquilized with the Thorazine. So Houston Smith was a very strong supporter of the potential value of psychedelics, but he also made a very important point, which was, and he's done this in general, but he said there's a difference between a religious experience and a religious life. And so he was really pointing to this process of integration, which is also what I had underestimated and ignored in my early years of trying to just do as many psychedelics as I could. So I think that the interviews with Houston Smith were also really instructional for me, as with the other supporters, the other helpers in the experiment. So I was honored to have some time with Houston Smith and be able to talk to him about psychedelics.
Yeah, no, that's fascinating. Well, you had mentioned, and we unfortunately had a little interruption in our conversation, but you had mentioned that Timothy Leary and others had underestimated the potential risk of this experiment. And maybe you could just comment on that briefly again.
Well, I think that what they really did that I thought was wrong was that once they saw that there was this person that had a difficult experience, they didn't report it. So I think they did underestimate at the beginning when they did this experiment what it would do for different people under the influence of these powerful sermons. But that's okay. You can underestimate things, and then you do research, and then you try to see what's really going on. But once you understand what's really going on, not to report that is really bad. Now, at the time that the experiment took place, there was kind of a general understanding that sometimes people would give Thorazine to bring people down off a difficult trip. And one of the main things we've learned, I would say, since then, and other people knew that right then, is that you freeze the experience in place when you tranquilize somebody during a difficult psychedelic experience. It's the worst thing you could do, not the best thing. And it's much better to support people while they're having a difficult experience, even if it's really painful, because at the end of it, they will at least realize they survived. They handled it, they could survive it. They maybe shut down, it was maybe overwhelming, but when you tranquilize them, you reinforce this idea they can't handle what's inside them, and that the best thing to do is just shut it down. And so I think that in a way they maybe thought, oh, this is not that uncommon. Sometimes Thorazine is used, but that's not the way you do research. And it was a very difficult thing for me to discover once I did this, because people look to the Good Friday experiment as this sort of epitome of classic, great scientific research into psychedelics and mystical experiences. And then to discover this part that should have been told but wasn't was disheartening. But again, I think in general, the boosterism that Tim Leary did was, after he left Harvard, was also this idea of all you need to do is take the drug. There was a little bit of this, just take the drug and you'll be enlightened, whatever that happens to mean. So there was too much of a sense that the drug itself is all you need to do, not the setting, the context, although Leary later developed concepts of the set and setting. And so it just was a cautionary note. And I think some of the things that spiraled out of control during the 60s might not have if there would have been a little bit more balanced presentation about the risks and not such an exaggeration that everybody who took the drug had a mystical experience. So that those things, I think... Now, I understand why Timothy Leary was willing to make those statements, because he felt that the backlash that he saw was coming from the government. They suppressed research in order to block anything about the benefits, and they exaggerated the risks. You know, LSD causes chromosome damage, and you're going to have deformed babies, or you take it and stare at the sun. So, you know, he became sort of an opposite mirror image of what the government was doing, and it was terribly damaging what the government did, but I think it wasn't as helpful. But I would say that the main hypothesis of the Good Friday experiment was confirmed by the follow-up study, and that hopeful intersection between mystical experiences and political and social justice action. I think it really does build compassion for others if you see them as part of your family, or that you're more similar than not. And that was the big hope for me back in 72 when I decided to focus my life on psychedelics when I was 18. It was more about the political implications of the mystical experience than it was about these tools for psychotherapy.
Well, that's sort of a fascinating juxtaposition. On the one hand, you're looking at the mystical experience as creating the environment to create, whether you want to call it social justice or this sense of oneness and our obligation to care for the other, compared to a more, I guess, therapeutic context in regard to helping people who have fundamental, I don't know if mental health issues is the right word, but who have baggage they're carrying that is negatively impacting their lives.
Yeah, I think that is right. And now there's actually one really important thing that we've learned about the relationship between the mystical experience and therapeutic outcome. So in the work with LSD and psilocybin in the 60s, and in the work over the last roughly 20, almost 25 years with psilocybin and other psychedelics, there's been a observed correlation between the depth of the mystical experience and therapeutic outcomes. People that are scared of dying, the more you feel this interconnectedness, you lose your fear of death. People that are depressed have this sense of connection, they're not so lonely and isolated. People who are addicted to alcohol or tobacco, you have this spiritual experience, you kind of can draw strength from that to resist things that might be harmful to you and get over certain habits. So that's pretty well, I'd say that's firmly established, that in the work with classic psychedelics, the way in which Walter Pahnke actually developed the mystical experience questionnaire for his dissertation, and that's been used essentially unchanged, minor changes since then in all of this research. But when we administer the same questionnaire to people in our studies with MDMA-assisted therapy for PTSD, people don't score quite as high on the mystical experience questionnaire as they do with MDMA, as they do with the classic psychedelics, but they do score pretty high. And 1/3 of the people that we tested did score over this 60% completion to be considered pretty much to have a mystical experience. But there was no correlation between the depth of the mystical experience and reduction of PTSD symptoms.
Oh, that's interesting.
So the way that MDMA works is we have this, what we call it, inner-directed therapy. We support whatever is emerging. It may be the trauma, it may be something else, it may come in the body, it may come in pains, it may come in emotions, it may come in nausea, any kind of different ways. We support the experience and expression of whatever is emerging, and we're not trying to focus people on revisit your trauma. That happens naturally. But we're also not trying to steer people to having a mystical experience. And in the work that's being done a lot with psilocybin, that is an explicit goal, because they have found that that is a predictor, a correlation with therapeutic outcomes. And I think that MDMA works differently, PTSD, in the sense that in order to revisit past traumas and try to do what we would call a fear extinction, memory reconsolidation, neuroplasticity, that you kind of need an ego intact to remember the things that happened to you. Or even if they happened when you were little, you're still kind of thinking about that. So I don't think you need this ego dissolution in order to heal from PTSD when you're under MDMA-assisted therapy.
Well, that's fascinating. Well, let me switch gears slightly, and we'll get back to this. But one, tell me from your perspective the connection between the mystical experience and consciousness.
Yeah, well, part of this mystical experience is there still is an observer. So how is it, that if you have this, reduction of activity in the default mode network, for example, where we think of as our sense of self, that even when that activity can be substantially diminished, there still is this observer of some kind. With 5-MeO-DMT, which is just an incredible, the most powerful psychedelic that we know of. It acts super fast.
This is the toad, correct?
Yeah, this is the toad. There are now vape pens, by the way, that are low, medium, and high doses of it, so you can moderate your dose. And
I wasn't aware of that. Thank you for sharing that.
Oh, it's so helpful. That is the new way. I mean,
wow.
Because it's so overwhelming. So I actually tried the vape pens a couple weeks ago. And, what they did for me was bring me in touch with prior trauma. And I could feel the dissolution of the ego, but I felt like, okay, I don't need to go further. I should deal with this trauma. But with 5-MeO in the past, you'd smoke it in a pipe and you wouldn't be able to moderate your dose, and you would just be overwhelmed, and you'd lose body control. You'd have to have spotters, and you would, I felt like I was sort of blasted into outer space and into the moment of creation. And so it was very inspirational for me, but this time using the vape pens, it was more therapeutic and catalyzing in that way. And I know if I would have kept using higher doses, then I would have lost my sense of self and been more this merging. But what Stan Grof has said is that the future of psychiatry is MDMA, and then like an hour later using the vape pens.
Wow,
and
that's fascinating.
Because the MDMA gives you the sense of safety. It's a reduction of activity in the amygdala. You're not so reactive to fear-based emotions. And so this dissolution of the ego is inherently frightening. It's the way in which we orient our survival in the world. And it takes a lot of skill to let that go. And that's where maturity and skill for people that do psychedelics, to be able to surrender, is a challenge. But when you have the MDMA base and the sense of safety, then you can sort of observe more carefully this dissolution and this move into this unit of consciousness.
Well, let me share with you, I have not necessarily sought out psychedelic experiences, but my wife has a few friends who are seekers, if you will, and one had recommended iboga to her,
Oh,
uh,
yes.
uh, and then the other had recommended the toad. And my wife listened and she goes, "That's amazing! Wow, maybe I should try that." So she actually signed up for these. And this is not an inexpensive exercise. And so then she comes to me as the time is getting close, and she says, "I'm too afraid to do this. Will you do this?"
Oh,
And so I said, "Sure." So,
oh, great, great, Jim. Hooray.
I just wanted to relate to you maybe quickly these two situations. One was the toad, if you will, and I would say, at least my own experience is that fear and anxiety, if they are present, will have a profound effect on the outcome
Yes.
of your experience. And for me, I had nothing. I felt perfectly comfortable. So when you mentioned your experience with the five D,
Yeah, the
five,
5-MeO
yeah,
DMT.
yeah, yeah.
The toad.
I felt like had been shot out of a slingshot into outer
Yeah.
space, right? I mean, it
Yeah.
was like a zoom. But the amazing thing was, while I was out there, I connected with everything and had this incredible sense of oneness. And I just cried tears of joy. And it was just this beautiful, extraordinary experience. And then with the iboga was. Again, there was a subset of people which sort of fascinated me because they would be crying and highly emotional because their shadow self, I think, came up and they had
Yes,
never
yes.
faced it. And I think if you've never faced it, then it's incredibly frightening because I think most people push that away. And if you push it away when you're weak, when you're stressed, when you're anxious, it will come back and bite you. And I think, at least for me, I've dealt with those issues a little bit. So I was perfectly fine. So people were vomiting and crying and all these things.
Yeah.
And I just had just a very fascinating, interesting experience where I got some insights. But again, I have not tried either since. But and in some ways, this is an interesting point because somebody mentioned heroin to me. They said, "Man, the first time I took it, I got this incredible blast, and I wanted to repeat it again, but I've never been able to repeat it." But I think people will chase after repeated psychedelic experiences, trying to get that same effect, and I think that's a really hard thing to do. And I think actually, it interferes with the possibilities of a positive experience. Maybe you could comment on how some people keep chasing this.
Yeah. Before that, I'd like to just say that one of the quotes that I use in my talk, a lot of my talks, is from Carl Jung. And what he said is the most important spiritual, therapeutic, and political thing we can do is to withdraw the projection of our shadow onto others. And I think we see that Trump is a master of that, of projection, of whatever he's doing is other people are doing the same thing. So his shadow is projected on everybody else. And so if we can withdraw the projection of our shadow and accept that as a part of ourself, then we can be more capable of seeing people as blends of good and bad. We're also blends of good and bad. And we don't need to demonize others because we can start to handle it ourselves. The other question before I get to your other question is, I'm just wondering about your wife. So after she's seen you do these two experiences, has she said, "Oh, okay, you've come back, maybe I should try it"?
No. Well, I love my wife dearly, but she has a lot of fear and anxiety about things sometimes. And again, as I was emphasizing, which I think is really important, if you go in with no fear, and we're talking about the shadow, and accept yourself, the good and the bad parts, and know that will never go away. You just have to be comfortable with it. And also, as you pointed out, understand that that's sort of the human dilemma, and it's
Yeah.
okay. And so I think not having that fear, but I think she's anxious that she's going to lose control. And I think there are a lot of people like that.
Yeah, and I think she's right. I mean, that is the point. You do lose control, but it's a control that's not necessarily so healthy by keeping things in the shadows. So you do lose control, but if you can help people feel in this safe container that they'll be supported in working with whatever they find, then it can be beneficial. But it doesn't help to say to people, oh, you're not going to lose control, because you will. And in fact, that's why you do it. We've got this conscious control all the time, and we're trying to get beyond that. So, and that's where I think we get to Stan Grof and this idea of using MDMA before you use the 5-MeO. That gives you that sense of safety that you can move into these other spaces.
No, I think that's a good point. And again, it is important to realize that those types of fears and anxieties will significantly interfere with the best experience you can have.
Yeah.
The other thing, I didn't mean to interrupt you. Go ahead.
No, go ahead. What I just want to say is that you can start without fear, and then you can encounter fear during the experience too. So you can't always say, "Oh, I'm feeling great now," because you never know what's going to emerge.
No, I certainly appreciate that. I've again, I have not repeatedly sought out these things. These things have sort of come to me, and I say, "Oh, that sounds interesting," and
I hear that to be an invitation for some vape pens.
we can talk. We can talk about that offline, Rick. But I did have an experience with MDMA and psilocybin, which was an interesting experience. And again, this may sound strange, but I was sort of doing this out of intellectual interest in that case. Yeah. And for me at least, it was strange because I felt that, and I actually just sat there in a meditative position for 5 hours.
Wow.
But I had this feeling that I could take on the suffering, and it was an interesting experience, to say the least.
Wow.
But it was very powerful because I was okay doing that.
Yeah.
So I had all of these people around me who were smelling flowers and saying "I love you," but but for me, it was a very deep experience of containing suffering. But,
wow. That just reminds me to mention an incredible documentary called Descending the Mountain. And it's about, have you seen it or heard about it by any chance?
No, I haven't.
Oh, great. Okay, so you'll love it because it's the combination of neuroscience, meditation, and psychedelics.
Ah.
So Vanya Palmers, who is the leader of the Zen community in Switzerland, I was introduced to him in 1983 by the Assistant Secretary General of the UN, Robert Mueller, who wrote New Genesis, Shaping Global Spirituality. And I introduced Vanya to MDMA back in 83 and 84. But over time, he had to leave the position as the head of the Zen community because Zen has been traditionally anti-psychedelic in a lot of its ways. It's about meditation, and psychedelics are potentially confusing or whatever, that it's not generally been accepted. So he had to leave his position of leadership in order to experiment with psychedelics, and then he's sort of come back. He's found a way to blend them with his meditation practice. And so this experiment was neuroscientists at the University of Zurich did brain scans with these lifelong meditators before and after they went to I think it was a 5-day Zen meditation retreat, a silent retreat. And in the middle of it, they got a pill. They all had, it was either psilocybin or a placebo. They were told to meditate through that, which was very difficult. So they got movies. So Descending the Mountain shows some of them unable to meditate through the psilocybin experience. But then what they did is brain scans after, they showed brain changes. They showed that it helped deepen their meditation practice. It had some personality changes. So I think what's happening in Zen, and I think your experience to sit and meditate with these psychedelics for that 5 hours, that's tremendous because I think that it's not either or. And there are ways that people are learning to synergize. It's not meditation or psychedelics. And it's not psychedelics all the time. You can meditate every day, but you take psychedelics very rarely. But even rarely, it can bring you to a state of mind that then when you're meditating, you can kind of aim in that direction, or you know that that's possible. So I think that Descending the Mountain is a beautiful, eloquent, poetic expression of science and mysticism and meditation.
Oh, great. I will have to see that. Uh, you mentioned something that I think actually is very relative here, which is these other techniques to get there, if you will.
Yeah.
And I know Stan Groff is a big holotropic breathwork person, if you will, and in fact, you were trained in that.
Yes.
And so maybe you can comment whether it's meditation, whether it's holotropic breathwork, or other techniques to get to that place. I spent some time with Father Keating, and he talked about centered prayer that took him at least what he described as a mystical experience. But maybe you can just comment for our listeners that while we're talking about psychedelics, there are a whole variety of other ways in which you can connect with this inner aspect of your consciousness, or if you want to call it mysticism.
Yeah, I think that that's really, really important, because I think there was this also mistaken understanding during the 60s that Leary and others would say, you must do the psychedelics, and the psychedelics give you this unique experience that you can't get in any other way. And I think that's fundamentally wrong. And one of the things that most impressed me about Sasha Shulgin, the sort of godfather of MDMA, he talked about his first mescaline experience that he had. His first psychedelic experience was with mescaline. But his conclusion was that he wasn't having a mescaline experience. He was having a human experience that the mescaline gave him access to. And when you think about it that way, then that means there are other ways to access it. So one of the brilliance of Stan was that after the backlash against the psychedelics, and many people went into meditation and said, the famous saying by Ram Dass, once you get the message, hang up the phone. As if there's only one message, which is right. But what Stan developed was a way through hyperventilation. And it was eloquent in what he said, just breathe faster and deeper. There was no complicated in this nostril, count these number of times, whatever. But you can alter your brain chemistry through hyperventilation, and you can sort of lower this, the barrier between the conscious and the unconscious mind becomes more permeable. People have done that through fasting. We talk about a lot of the Native Americans have done that through pain, through different kind of ceremonies. The Sundance, where you're pulling, something through your flesh, through your muscles. There's ways through sex. There's ways through just being in nature. There's a whole category of experiences that was called gratuitous grace. It just comes over you, and you didn't really prepare or do anything to it. So I think all of these different techniques point to the fact that these are inner human experiences that we can access in multiple ways. And not only that, but once we've accessed them, we can try to learn to do that on our own in a more voluntary way. And I think one of the best examples of that for me was Brother David Steindl-Rast, who was a
yes.
So I also introduced him to MDMA for his first MDMA experiences. And he used MDMA in the monastery as an aid to meditation. And this was now the monastery right near Big Sur, the Camaldolese monastery. So several of the other monks were there, also experimenting started. And Father Bruno, who was the prior at the time, called me into a meeting. And he's like, "What are you doing with my monks and your drugs? What's going on here?" But I was able to explain to him why. And luckily, they were legal at the time. And so he permitted them to keep experimenting. But what was so elegant about what Brother David did is he has a book called Gratitude is the Heart of Prayer. And he said that people kind of make it out that this mystical experience is something you have to meditate for 20 years, you have to live on a mountaintop, But he says that everybody has mystical experiences in the sense of gratitude, that you're just for your breath, for being alive, and that you can tune in to this universal love just by being grateful about things. So that's just a way to kind of bring it back to something that we can all do. So I think the main lesson about all these different techniques, it's not that one is better than the other either. It's just which people, which one do you gravitate to? Or do you gravitate to the range of them? And I think the beauty of this descending the mountain and this new research demonstrating again that you can combine lifelong Zen meditation with an occasional psychedelic experience and then deepen your meditation practice, that there's a way in which they're all synergistic. But over the course of human history, for thousands of years, the most reliable catalyst has been psychedelics. And when we talk a lot about mainstreaming psychedelics or bringing them back into our culture, what many people don't realize is that the Western culture with the Greeks for 2,000 years had the Eleusinian Mysteries, which was from around 1600 BC to around 392 or so. And this was involving a psychedelic drug. And so everybody who we know, Plato, Aristotle, Pythagoras, all of the great Socrates, all of these people that we think of as, epitome of the Greek culture, they participated in the Eleusinian Mysteries. And so they had this mystical spiritual understanding the process of death, rebirth, that while we are, born and die in a very limited time frame, we're also part of this much bigger story, and some part of us never really dies. I mean, I would say that our ego and the self dies, but energy is not lost, or it's just transformed. So I think that we've got this clear sense that there are multiple techniques that people can use if they want to try to experience these things. And it's just which people, which techniques do you gravitate to? None are better or worse than the others. But I do think that in view of the crisis, now, if we'll talk about compassion about what's going on in the world, we have terrible climate change, we have mass extinction, we have the rise of authoritarianism. It's a dangerous time, and we have nuclear weapons of incredible destructive power. So I think there's an imperative for humanity as a whole and individuals to evolve so that we are way more advanced intellectually than we are emotionally and spiritually. And so and we have technology that we can't handle, and we're handling in a poor way. So I do think that we need to accelerate our emotional and spiritual maturity as individuals and collectively to handle what technologies we've created. And if so, we can have kind of paradise on earth. And that because time is short, I think that psychedelics should be legal, they should be medicines, they should be one of the tools that are available to people, but they should be anchored within the context of all these other approaches that help ground and integrate them.
No, I think that's actually an excellent point. It's sad because you see so many people who don't understand that they are carrying baggage which allows them to be manipulated or convinced or do actions that's not really their true self. But they need to look into that and have this sort of metacognition of how that is impacting them. Maybe I can ask you three more things here.
Sure.
Tell me your thoughts on microdosing, because that seems to be the latest on the Housewives of Beverly Hills, or whoever the heck it is. Everybody's talking about it, right?
Yeah. Well, I think that microdosing is a very interesting development, and there's all sorts of benefits that people have reported. If they really want to learn about it, check out Jim Fadiman on the internet, and he's sort of been the one that's cataloged most of these experiences. But there's a variety of reported benefits in terms of more creativity, more focus, more energy, uplifting of depression or anxiety. Personally, I'll say that I prefer macrodosing. And because I don't want to be like dependent on taking something every day, even, or maybe vitamins or something. But I think that for psychological issues, depression, anxiety, PTSD, you can have a lift by microdosing. But I think it's ideally you get into a situation where you could do deeper doses into the root of the problem so that your baseline is changed and you don't need to do this. So I think there's a very interesting study about semantic priming. And I think this suggests how microdosing can be helpful in a creative problem-solving way. That's why it's been so popular in Silicon Valley and a lot of competitive conditions. So the study was done with psilocybin and semantic priming. So semantic priming means I say day, you say night, I say sun, you say moon. There's just these normal kind of patterns. But when you give somebody psilocybin and you prime them with one of these starter words, that they have a wider range of associations than they would normally. Somehow the psilocybin or whatever the microdose is, that it in this case it was psilocybin, it kind of expands your neural networks, your sense of connections. Now, the other thing, though, is that the few studies that have been done trying to demonstrate microdosing and creativity have failed. They have not shown that it was greater than placebo. Now, one explanation is the measures aren't that sensitive, and these are people, there's ceiling effects, and they're already good at all this, but that's not completely satisfying. So I do think that there needs to be a lot more research, but I do think that microdosing for pain, some people do that, or microdosing for a mood lift. So it's kind of exciting, actually, that people have taken this very powerful psychedelics, particularly like LSD or psilocybin, and have found a way to use it in these small doses. It's like growing comfortable with it in this is different way, and there's a whole set of different benefits. So I think it's more and more people are doing it, and I think it's mostly a good thing.
I would say, though, and maybe this is just being converse, I think that many of these things are in some way a placebo effect with
Yes.
microdosing,
Yeah.
where you believe it and therefore it becomes. And because many of these things, if you have done mind training, they're available to you.
Yes. Yes.
And so that's one comment. But there are three other things I wanted to mention.
Okay.
Manna. We
Yeah.
were talking about the Greeks, but I had a conversation with somebody who said that manna was actually a psychedelic, and in fact, it's been used in Jewish traditions for thousands of years. And in fact, there's a rabbi in Denver who promotes psilocybin. I don't know if you know who that is, but he started a synagogue which you join to be able to impart in the sacrament.
Wow. Well, there's a great story. So there is the head of cognitive psychology at Hebrew University, Benny Shannon, was very cognitive, but he got really interested in ayahuasca. And so he ended up writing a whole book on ayahuasca, and it kind of balanced him out. And then later he did this study about manna, and he wrote this scientific paper that claimed that Moses was high on a psychedelic when he saw the burning bush.
He was a
And
psychonaut.
He was a psychonaut, and that the manna that grew up like mushrooms or so, this was after I was back in school, after this 10 years where I was dropped out, and I went to my dad, and it was great. I said, Dad, my whole life, it's justified because Moses used psychedelics. It's part of our origin history, and psychedelics were part of Judaism, and now I'm just following in Moses's line, and everything's great, and it's so great you supported me to do this. And my dad was hilarious. He said, in order for me to believe that, first off, I'd have to believe in Moses. And then he said there's no archaeological evidence that the Jews built the pyramids. There's no evidence that they crossed the Sinai for 40 years. And it's maybe mythological, symbolic, metaphorical. But I do think that I like to believe, at least, that psychedelics were intimately involved with Judaism from the very beginning. But certainly they're involved with now. And I think that one of the things that led me to psychedelics was my disappointment with my bar mitzvah.
Now
because
now we're getting to the root of all of your problems here. So I
yes, because I had this, again, I'm the oldest of four kids, and I had this idea that the bar mitzvah was going to change me. It was going to turn me into a man, and that this had been going on for thousands of years. And there was something about this rite of passage that was going to sink deep into these emotional and intellectual changes that I was going through, and that it would make me into a man. And I remember the morning after my bar mitzvah, and I'm lying in bed, I woke up and I'm like, I'm the same. I am not any different. This bar mitzvah did nothing. And then I'm like, well, I did have a party. But then I was like, okay, God's busy. A lot of people probably got bar mitzvah. I'll just wait another day. And so I waited another day, nothing. And I kept waiting and waiting. And finally a whole week goes by. And I'm like, all right, a whole new crop of people have been bar mitzvah. I have just fallen off the list. It's just not going to happen. But 4 years later, when I was 17, 4.5 years later, when I started trying LSD, I thought, this is what my bar mitzvah should have been. Who am I? Where do I fit in? How am I connected to the bigger universe? So I like this thought that maybe manna was psychedelic and psychedelics are connected to Judaism, but certainly we need to make them more. And in fact, there is a project that we have, which is there's small groups of Israelis and talk about compassion. There's small groups of Israelis and Palestinians that are doing ayahuasca and MDMA together. And
Wow.
we're now studying that. We've got a contract with Hebrew University in Jerusalem. They have the largest academic program in conflict negotiation, management, and resolution. And so they're working to develop some metrics to evaluate whether we can bring Israelis and Palestinians together, have them have MDMA experience, and then see if that reduces the otherizing and various prejudices that they might have. And Lior Roseman is a neuroscientist. Actually, I don't know. So Lior Roseman is a neuroscientist. He worked with Robin Carr at Harris. He did a lot of the work on the brains that you see, the brain under LSD and the brain,
Right.
all the connections. But he got kind of disillusioned a little bit with neuroscience, and even more disillusioned by the politics in Israel. And so he's now moved from neuroscience, which was his complete focus, and now he does a lot of work on these Israelis and Palestinians with ayahuasca. And he's taken a group of Israelis and Palestinians to Spain for a group ayahuasca experience.
Wow.
So I think that there's also an amazing study that's going to be discussed in a couple weeks, actually, at the Parliament of the World Religions. So that's
I will be there. Are you going?
Well, Cody Swift, he's done a qualitative study of the Religious Leaders Project that was done by Roland Griffiths and Tony Bosas. I don't know that I'm coming because I'm going to Sarajevo for
That's
training
right.
for Ukrainian therapists.
Yes.
But you're going to be there. That's great.
Yes, I'm on 2 panels. You may find this amazing, as I'm an atheist, but I have been a senior advisor to the Council of the Parliament of the World's Religions for many years.
Wow, that's tremendous.
Yes.
Yeah.
Well,
So if you can make sure that if you have
yeah,
time, if it's not at the same time one of your talks, Cody Swift will be
perfect.
talking about the qualitative study of the religious leaders who receive psilocybin from a
Oh,
range of
wow.
different religions. It's in
Wow.
Chicago. Yeah.
Yeah, that's extraordinary.
Yeah.
I don't know if you know, Rick, I've had this incredible experience of interacting with not only the Dalai Lama,
Yeah.
as I was the chairman of the Dalai Lama Foundation, but a number of spiritual and religious leaders around the world, which has been an extraordinarily enlightening experience, because what you see is there's the dogma, but all of these people sit above the dogma because they have this intuitive sense of our oneness, the nature of compassion, connection, unconditional love. And it's really quite extraordinary and quite beautiful. And so I feel very blessed to have interacted with so many of these extraordinary individuals.
Wow, that's wonderful, because I'd say, it was the Good Friday experiment follow-up that really confirmed my theory of change, that there are these political implications of the mystical experience. And you're sort of reflecting that back, that people are above the dogma. They become a little bit more metaphorical and ecumenical, and can appreciate and not be scared of other traditions. And I think that that's something that is so important. And then it was this Robert Mueller, the Assistant Secretary General of the UN, this idea of new genesis shaping global spirituality. It was the idea that the UN was created to mediate conflicts between countries, but a lot of those conflicts are religious-based. And we need to find a way to help people not kill each other because they have a slightly different dogma.
Well, that's interesting. I spent a lot of time in Belfast, and discussing a number of these issues and bringing programs on compassion, self-compassion that we've developed at Stanford. But in fact, we're going to have a conference there in the next year or so, looking at some of these things. But what's interesting is that, and in some ways, the United States might be better, is, when you have these groups of people, and it also, I think, relates to the Hutus and Tutsis, you have these people who are fixed in a geography, they're born there, they die there, and therefore they carry generations of trauma that they can't escape from. And it keeps repeating over and over again, which of course is a tragedy. The opposite side of that coin is, we have people in the United States, they're not afflicted by that, but because they don't have a connection to a family, people who've known them, these deep connections, then that creates an environment where they're stressed and they're anxious because they don't have that normal deep human connection that offers resilience to overcome those feelings. Okay, 2 questions, and then we probably should go on. So the first one is, tell me about Carlos Castaneda.
Oh my gosh. Okay, that's great. So here's a funny point. So so now this is now 1973, and I'm 19 years old, and I am in New Orleans. This was before I started building things. And so I spent a couple months in New Orleans before Mardi Gras. And I had recently seen Easy Rider, the movie. So I'm in New Orleans right around Mardi Gras, and some friends and I thought, let's take LSD and hop over the fence and hang out in these cemeteries, the way they did in Easy Rider. And while we were doing that, this is in the middle of the night, we discovered a crypt that had been, the door had been pulled open, there was a note in there, and there was some voodoo dolls there. You'll see how this gets around to Castaneda. So I was with 4 of us, and one of the girls was like, oh, this is super scary, what are we going to do? And I said, well, let's read the note. And at least we'll read the note. So the note was this woman wanted her boyfriend to stop falling in love with her best friend and fall back in love with her. So we figured that this was low-level voodoo. And so we thought, okay, we can take these voodoo dolls as souvenirs. So we took these voodoo dolls, and I got one and a friend got one. And then 2 days later, right when I'm getting ready to leave New Orleans, I go to see maybe we can score some more voodoo dolls. Maybe somebody, replace them with. So we get there right as the cemetery is closed, and I climb up the wall is not that high, just to look in, to see if I can see. And a police car comes by and says, get down from there. So I get down from there. I walk around the block, 3 police cars come, they surround me, and they come up to me and my friend who is there, and he said, the police officer said, how many more of you are in there? And I said, well, they're all dead in there. So he said, you're under arrest. So he arrested me, and I spent, but I had friends who were in legal aid, and while I'm arrested in this big room, everybody's telling stories of how ridiculous they got arrested. Everybody's, of course, innocent. And this one guy says, oh my God, I'm a city councilor. I saw people being harassed by the police. I went over to see what was going on, and they arrested me too. And he said, now I can bail everybody out here on their own recognizance if you want, and I'm going to get these guys in trouble for what they were doing. And he bails out my friend and others, and I'm like, okay, I'm never going to be in jail again. I'll stay with you and just to see what it's like. All right, so as soon as everybody's gone, it's just he and I, then they separate us, and they put me into a cell all by myself. And I have to wait the night to when I come to the arraignment. The only thing that is in this cell is a book by Carlos Castaneda. I'm deep buried in the New Orleans jail, and there I am able to read Carlos Castaneda. It just was incredible. And so I do think that it was amazing, but I do think that Carlos Castellano made up a bunch of it, and one of his books was called Tales of Power. And so I think that he got wrong. I think he got off track. He was amazing. He did make a bunch of the stuff up for his dissertation, but it inspired loads and loads of people. But I think he moved towards power rather than healing. And I think that that's where he got off track. And I think that is true. A lot of the Castaneda books are about power struggles between different shamans. And why I gravitated while I was reading Castaneda and also reading Stan Grof is that Stan was focused on healing. And that's, I really thought, was the anchor. And that is the reality check. And that you can get distracted by being focused on power. So I think in the later years of his life, Carlos Castaneda started teaching about different kind of movements. Like we know the Sufis with the whirling dervishes and things, that Castaneda got involved in sort of physical ways to try to get into different states of consciousness, but he became more and more marginalized and more isolated. And so I think that he was very helpful in bringing to awareness the idea of shamanism, of psychedelics, of peyote. But again, this idea of when you move away from healing into power, you're losing the thread.
Well, I think that's a profound way to end, but I'm not going to let in because I have one more question. But because in many ways, it's this dichotomy between what is it that you're going to focus on? Are you going to focus on the other, or are you going to focus essentially on yourself, right? Which is the acquisition of power. And I frankly, I think that's what we're seeing in our present day society in the United States. And it's very unfortunate because everything is available now for us to understand our oneness, our connection, and to, frankly, be part of the human race, not a tribe. And I think that's really important. But
actually, let me just add one quick thing there, which is that I think that it's both. That the more you understand our commonalities, the more we can appreciate the differences. So that we can be a specific tribe. I'm Jewish, but we can be our tribal self, but what we know is that underneath that, we're primarily human. In the same way with above the dogma that you described, that there's a religious experience, a sense of connection, and then the dogma sort of flows from that, but it's not as central as that. So I think that a lot of people fear that if they have these mystical experiences, and I think that you'll see this with the religious leader study that Cody will talk about at the Parliament of the World Religions, is that people stay within their religions, but they do change their interpretation. They become more ecumenical, more metaphorical, but it doesn't mean that you have to give away who you really are. The same way that we don't, like when Robert Mueller talked about global spirituality, it doesn't mean that we have to give up all the particular religions and things that have come through thousands of years through different cultures. It can be both, the unity and the diversity.
No, I think that's exactly right. And actually, there's a wonderful book by David Destino called How God Works. Have you seen that?
No.
Oh, it's fascinating because it talks about the nature of religious ritual and how it affects your brain, and it gives you this a sense of comfort and support. And again, it gets back to this whole idea. If you're in a tribe, there's commonality, you connect, you feel comfortable. And I think that's what we were made to do. But I think your point's really critical to understand that it's fine to have your own tribe, but at the end of the day, you are still part of humanity. So my last question, though, is over your right shoulder, there's a strange picture, which I've been looking at here and trying to figure out what the hell that is.
Oh, that's hilarious.
So tell us what that is behind you there.
Oh, okay, because you've shared stories about your wife, so now I get a chance to share a story about my wife.
Okay.
So this was my wife and a bunch of her girlfriends had this monthly, they called it art night. And they would get together and they would make art of different kinds. And for some of them, for most of them, it was just art therapy in a sense. But for some, it became art. So right over my shoulder behind it in the stained glass, that's stuff that my mother made. But the one there my wife did a whole series of Madonnas.
Yes, that's the one I'm talking about. Yeah.
Yeah, and so this was the Madonna of the patron saint of multitaskers. So this was the mothers that have to do other things. I'll show you one other one, which is you can't really see there, but this is called the Madonna with Other Plans. So there are all these babies that are sort of falling out of her head because she doesn't want to have babies. So it's Madonna with Other Plans.
I think you need to put this on the MAPS website so that we can see your wife's art.
She would love to hear that. Yeah.
Yes, absolutely. Maybe she could even start selling the art and support.
Well, she doesn't make that many of them, so it's nice to have her, But this was, and she would illustrate it with found objects and stuff. So that's where that old cell phone and things like that. And thank you for asking that, Jim. That's great.
No. Well, listen, I so appreciate you taking the time. It's really been an amazing pleasure. I think we've covered a fair amount of turf here, and hopefully it's maybe slightly different than some of your other conversations.
Oh, very much so. Very much so. And I just like to, if anybody wants to learn about MAPS, maps.org, and we are a nonprofit, and they can make donations if they want. And the Public Benefit Corp is our pharmaceutical arm. So that's, we hope MDMA will be a medicine by around May or June of 2024.
Oh, fantastic. Well, thank you so much. We'll post that in our show notes, and we'll also post the link to MAPS. And there was something else that we were going to post, but I'm sure my assistants in this podcast will be incredibly critical in figuring out what the hell that is. So, okay, Rick, listen, take care of yourself. Okay. Much love. And I hope we have a chance to get together in person and maybe use a vape pen.
And maybe we can talk to your wife about MDMA.
Yes, actually, exactly. Okay, my friend.
Okay.
Take care. Be well. Thanks again. Again, thank you for being with us today. The Into the Magic Shop podcast can be found where you find your most popular podcasts, or you can find us at intothemagicshop.com.